No one in the Galactic Assembly believed Earth would survive first contact. Most species needed centuries of unity before joining the interstellar community. Humans. They were still squabbling over resources, borders, and ideologies. When the Viridian scout ships arrived, the analysts predicted Earth would fracture further under the pressure. The humans would either destroy themselves in panic or be absorbed as a protectorate like so many developing worlds before them. No one expected them to unite in 6 days. No one expected them to unveil a warship within 3 months. I was there when the human vessel Retribution first approached Outpost Sigma 9. As chief diplomatic officer of the station, I'd studied every available record on Earth's military history. The data suggested their technology was primitive, barely capable of reaching their own moon. Yet the vessel that appeared on our scanners defied everything we thought we knew. Approaching vessel, identify yourself, Commander Vrax ordered through the comms. His 4 eyes narrowed as the massive silhouette grew larger on our view screen. The ship was sleek, angular, and utterly black, absorbing rather than reflecting the light of nearby stars. It moved with unnatural silence, no visible propulsion system. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of Earth Vessel Retribution," came the reply. The voice was calm, measured, requesting permission to dock and establish diplomatic relations. Vrax looked at me, all 4 eyes blinking in confusion. "How did they build that?" he whispered. "Our intelligence said they were at least 50 years from developing interstellar capabilities." I had no answer. The human vessel was unlike anything in our records. Its whole composition was unknown to our scanners. The energy signature was strange. Where most species' first interstellar ships were crude, bulky things built with borrowed or reverse-engineered technology, this vessel appeared purpose-built, elegant, deadly. "Permission granted, Captain Chen," I replied. "Follow docking protocols on subchannel Theta. We look forward to meeting with you." The Galactic Assembly had spent generations cultivating peace among the stars. War was considered primitive, a relic of evolutionary history. Most species eventually outgrew it. But looking at the Retribution as it gracefully aligned with our docking bay, I felt something I hadn't experienced in centuries of diplomatic service: fear. The human delegation consisted of 5 members. Captain Chen led them, tall for her species, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Behind her walked 2 scientists, a diplomat, and what they called a security officer, though his bearing suggested warrior would be more accurate. "Thank you for your hospitality," Captain Chen said, extending a hand in what our briefings identified as a traditional Earth greeting. I touched my palm to hers, careful to maintain proper pressure. Humans were more fragile than they appeared. "The Assembly welcomes Earth's representatives," I said, following protocol. "Though we must admit some surprise at your rapid technological advancement." A slight smile crossed the captain's face. "Necessity is the mother of invention, as we say. When we learned we weren't alone in the universe, certain projects were accelerated." The diplomatic reception proceeded according to standard first contact procedures. We showed them the station, explained the basic structure of the assembly, discussed potential trade agreements. But throughout it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were holding something back. They asked pointed questions about defense systems, territorial boundaries, and conflict resolution mechanisms. They were particularly interested in the Tarvos incident, the last armed conflict between assembly members, centuries ago. Late in the cycle, I escorted Captain Chen to the observation deck. The Retribution hung in space below us, its dark hull reflecting nothing. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Chen said, gazing at her ship. "Indeed," I replied, though our engineers are quite puzzled by her design. The materials, the propulsion system, they're unlike anything we've encountered. Chen studied me for a moment. "The Viridian scout ships weren't the first aliens to visit Earth," she said quietly. My heart skipped. This was not in any of our intelligence reports. 60 Earth years ago, a vessel crashed in a remote region," she continued. "Its occupants didn't survive, but the technology did. We've been studying it, adapting it, improving upon it. When the Viridians arrived, we already had prototypes. That's concerning, I admitted. The Assembly has strict protocols regarding technology sharing, especially with developing worlds. It wasn't shared, Chen replied, her voice hardening slightly. It crashed. And based on the records we recovered, it wasn't friendly. It was hunting. A chill ran through my body. There were rumors, of course, whispers of species beyond assembly space that followed different paths. Species that saw others as resources rather than potential allies. But most dismissed these as myths, cautionary tales from the early days of interstellar travel. The Assembly can offer Earth protection, I said carefully. That's part of what membership means. Captain Chen turned to me fully now, her expression unreadable. With all due respect, officer, Earth doesn't need protection. We need allies who understand what's coming. And what is coming, Captain? Before she could answer, the station's alert system blared to life. Commander Vrax's voice echoed through the chamber. Unidentified vessels approaching from Sector 12. All personnel to emergency stations. Chen's communicator beeped. She glanced at it, and something in her expression shifted. They're earlier than we expected, she murmured. You know who they are? I asked, suddenly aware of how isolated we were on the observation deck. The captain nodded grimly. The ones who built the ship that crashed on Earth. The ones who've been picking off isolated worlds at the edges of your assembly for decades while you convinced yourselves you were alone in the galaxy. She tapped her communicator. Retribution, battle stations. Deploy countermeasures as planned. Through the viewport, I watched in stunned silence as the human vessel's hull seemed to ripple. Sections slid apart, revealing weapon systems unlike anything the Assembly had developed in its peaceful existence. The dark ship began to glow with energy readings that our sensors couldn't classify. I'm sorry we couldn't be more forthcoming, Chen said, placing a hand on my shoulder. But no one in your assembly was ready to hear that peace isn't the natural state of the universe. No one was ready for what humanity learned the hard way. On the horizon, 3 massive ships appeared, their hulls bristling with what were unmistakably weapons. The peaceful assembly was about to face something it hadn't encountered in generations, and Earth's deadly warship was all that stood between us and extinction. The observation deck trembled as the station's defensive systems activated. Ancient shield generators, rarely used outside of routine drills, hummed to life with a concerning whine. I'd never heard them strain like that before. The approaching vessels radiated power signatures that overwhelmed our sensors, causing readouts to flicker and distort across the monitoring panels. Your station isn't equipped for this, Captain Chen said, her voice cutting through my rising panic. She wasn't asking a question. The assembly hasn't faced external aggression in over 3 centuries, I admitted. Our defenses are ceremonial. Chen nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. Get me to Commander Vrax. Now. We raced through corridors suddenly alive with controlled chaos. Species from across the assembly. Each evolved for different environments, different gravities, different atmospheric compositions, moved with unified purpose. Emergency protocols that had never been truly tested were now their only hope. In the command center, Vrax's 4 arms worked frantically across multiple consoles. His exoskeleton had darkened, a physiological response to stress in his species. Officer Tlexin, he acknowledged without looking up. The unknown vessels are not responding to hails. Their weapon systems are active and targeting our station. Commander, Chen interrupted, stepping forward. I need control of your communications array. Vrax finally looked up, his compound eyes reflecting the red emergency lights. This is an assembly station. You have no authority. Your shields will fail in approximately 6 minutes, Chen cut in. Those ships carry graviton cannons that will tear through your hull like paper. The only reason they haven't fired already is because they're curious about my ship. The command center fell silent. Even the alarms seemed to dim. How do you know what weapons they carry? Vrax asked, voice low. Because we fought them before. Chen turned to a display showing the Retribution, which was now positioned between the station and the approaching vessels. Not just the crash I mentioned. There have been incidents, isolated attacks on Earth outposts. We kept them quiet to avoid panic. I studied the human captain's face. There was no fear there, only focused determination. You knew they would follow you here, I realized aloud. We suspected, she corrected. Earth couldn't join your assembly without revealing everything we know. But revealing everything without proof would have labeled us paranoid, primitive, warmongering. We needed you to see for yourselves. Vrax's upper limbs twitched in agitation. You used my station as bait. I positioned Earth's most advanced warship to protect your station, Chen countered. Now, the communications array. Please. After a tense moment, Vrax nodded to a technician. Chen stepped to the console and entered a series of commands. Retribution. This is Chen. Execute Protocol Harbinger. On the view screen, the Earth vessel's surface rippled again. What I had initially taken for weapon ports were transforming, reshaping. The ship itself seemed alive, adaptive. Segments rotated, locked into new configurations. Energy readings spiked beyond anything our instruments could measure. What is that ship made of? One of the station's engineers whispered. We call it reactive metamaterial, replied Dr. Lakshmi Patel, one of the scientists from Chen's delegation. She'd entered the command center behind us, her eyes fixed on the display. It can change structural properties in response to different energy signatures. The hull adapts to incoming weapons, redirecting or absorbing the energy. Impossible, the engineer muttered. The computational requirements alone are handled by quantum systems based on technology we recovered, Dr. Patel finished. We didn't just copy the crashed ship, we improved it. On the screen, one of the enemy vessels fired. A beam of concentrated energy lanced toward the Retribution. Instead of attempting to evade, the Earth ship turned directly into the attack. The beam struck the hull and vanished. The Retribution's surface briefly glowed where the weapon had hit, then returned to its matte black. Absorption complete, came a voice over the comms. Energy redirected to primary systems. Countermeasures ready, Captain. Hold position, Lieutenant Kovic, Chen ordered. Let them take another shot. I looked at her in disbelief. You're baiting them. A grim smile touched Chen's lips. We need to confirm all three ships use the same weapons technology. If they're who we think they are, they don't share advances. Each ship is a competitor. As if on cue, the second vessel fired. Again, the Retribution absorbed the attack. The third vessel held its position, seemingly reassessing. They're confused, Chen explained. Their technology is designed to destroy, not to be countered. They've never encountered resistance that adapts. Who are they? Vrax demanded. Chen's eyes never left the screen. They call themselves the Harvesters. They don't establish colonies or trade routes. They find worlds with useful resources or technologies, extract everything of value, and move on. Sometimes they take slaves. Usually, they leave nothing behind. The third vessel finally fired. Its beam noticeably different, modulated somehow. The Retribution shuddered visibly upon impact, but again absorbed the attack. All three confirmed, reported Lieutenant Kovic. Capacitors at maximum, awaiting your command. Chen turned to Vrax and me. What happens next needs to be witnessed and reported accurately to your assembly. The Harvesters have been operating in the shadows of your civilization for generations. You need to understand what you're facing. Vrax's exoskeleton had paled to an ashen gray. You have our attention, Captain. Chen nodded and turned back to the comms. Retribution, execute Phase 2. Targeted demonstration only. The Earth ship pivoted with impossible grace. Its hull flowed once more, forming what appeared to be a focused aperture at its bow. Energy collected there, coalescing into a point of light so intense that the view screen automatically dimmed to protect our vision. What you're about to see, Dr. Patel said quietly, is the redirected energy from their own weapons, reconfigured using principles we developed by studying their technology. We call it the reflection protocol. The retribution fired. A single concentrated beam shot toward the nearest harvester vessel. It struck with surgical precision, bypassing what must have been shields or defensive systems. The enemy ship didn't explode or break apart. Instead, it simply stopped. All energy signatures flatlined. It drifted, dead in space. "One shot," whispered the engineer beside me. "One shot to disable a ship of that size." The remaining harvester vessels immediately began to retreat, accelerating away from the station with alarming speed. "Should we pursue?" Kovic asked over the comms. "Negative," Chen replied. "Our mission was demonstration and defense, not engagement. Let them carry the message back." As the enemy ships vanished from our sensors, the command center erupted in chaotic discussion. Species that hadn't spoken directly to each other in decades due to political disagreements were now huddled together, gesturing at displays and exchanging rapid analyses. Vrax approached Chen, his posture formal, but his voice shaking slightly. "The Assembly owes you a debt, Captain. Without your intervention, Earth doesn't seek debts or gratitude," Chen replied. "We seek partnership. The harvesters will return, and in greater numbers. What you witnessed was only 3 scout ships. Their main fleet consists of vessels 10 times that size." I felt a chill run through my body. "How do you know this?" Chen exchanged glances with Dr. Piddle before answering. "Because when we recovered their crashed ship, we also recovered their navigation data. We've mapped their territory, their resource extraction patterns, their fleet movements. They've been circling the edges of assembly space for centuries, picking off unaligned worlds, gathering strength." "And now?" Vrax asked. Captain Chen's eyes hardened. "Now they know someone can fight back, which means the real war is about to begin." 3 days after the encounter at Outpost Sigma 9, the Assembly Council convened an emergency session. It was the first time in over a century that all 47 member species had gathered in person, rather than through holographic proxies. The Grand Chamber on Arcturus Station hummed with nervous energy as representatives filed in, their disparate physiologies creating a living tapestry of evolutionary paths. I stood beside Captain Chen and her delegation, acutely aware of the historical significance of this moment. The last time the Assembly had faced an external threat, barely a dozen species had achieved interstellar travel. Now, as Chen prepared to address the Council, I wondered how many would survive what was coming. "The representatives will question your motives," I warned her quietly. "Many still believe this is some elaborate deception to fast-track Earth's membership." Chen adjusted the collar of her formal uniform. Unlike the practical jumpsuit she'd worn during the attack, this one bore insignias and medals that told a story I couldn't read. "Let them question," she replied. "The harvesters won't wait for political consensus." High Counselor Genta, an ancient Morrigan whose crystalline body had witnessed the founding of the Assembly itself, called the session to order. The Earth ship pivoted with impossible grace. Its hull flowed once more, forming what appeared to be a focused aperture at its bow. Energy collected there, coalescing into a point of light so intense that the view screen automatically dimmed to protect our vision. "What you're about to see," Dr. Patel said quietly, "is the redirected energy from their own weapons, reconfigured using principles we developed by studying their technology. We call it the reflection protocol." The retribution fired. A single concentrated beam shot toward the nearest harvester vessel. It struck with surgical precision, bypassing what must have been shields or defensive systems. The enemy ship didn't explode or break apart. Instead, it simply stopped. All energy signatures flatlined. It drifted, dead in space. "One shot," whispered the engineer beside me. "One shot to disable a ship of that size." The remaining harvester vessels immediately began to retreat, accelerating away from the station with alarming speed. "Should we pursue?" Kovic asked over the comms. Negative, Chen replied. Our mission was demonstration and defense, not engagement. Let them carry the message back. As the enemy ships vanished from our sensors, the command center erupted in chaotic discussion. Species that hadn't spoken directly to each other in decades due to political disagreements were now huddled together, gesturing at displays and exchanging rapid analyses. Vrax approached Chen, his posture formal, but his voice shaking slightly. The Assembly owes you a debt, Captain. Without your intervention, Earth doesn't seek debts or gratitude, Chen replied. We seek partnership. The harvesters will return, and in greater numbers. What you witnessed was only 3 scout ships. Their main fleet consists of vessels 10 times that size. I felt a chill run through my body. How do you know this? Chen exchanged glances with Dr. Petal before answering. Because when we recovered their crashed ship, we also recovered their navigation data. We've mapped their territory, their resource extraction patterns, their fleet movements. They've been circling the edges of assembly space for centuries, picking off unaligned worlds, gathering strength. And now? Vrax asked. Captain Chen's eyes hardened. Now they know someone can fight back, which means the real war is about to begin. 3 days after the encounter at Outpost Sigma 9, the Assembly Council convened an emergency session. It was the first time in over a century that all 47 member species had gathered in person, rather than through holographic proxies. The Grand Chamber on Arcturus Station hummed with nervous energy as representatives filed in, their disparate physiologies creating a living tapestry of evolutionary paths. I stood beside Captain Chen and her delegation, acutely aware of the historical significance of this moment. The last time the Assembly had faced an external threat, barely a dozen species had achieved interstellar travel. Now, as Chen prepared to address the Council, I wondered how many would survive what was coming. The representatives will question your motives, I warned her quietly. Many still believe this is some elaborate deception to fast-track Earth's membership. Chen adjusted the collar of her formal uniform. Unlike the practical jumpsuit she'd worn during the attack, this one bore insignias and medals that told a story I couldn't read. Let them question, she replied. The harvesters won't wait for political consensus. High Counselor Genta, an ancient Morrigan whose crystalline body had witnessed the founding of the Assembly itself, called the session to order, is designed for customs enforcement and piracy suppression. Chen interrupted gently. Not war. You haven't built warships in 3 centuries. Your weapons technology has stagnated while your prosperity grew. You are wealthy, advanced, civilized, and utterly unprepared. High Counselor, Genta's crystalline form darkened. What would you have us do, Captain? Abandon 3 centuries of peace. Return to the militarism that nearly destroyed us before the Assembly's founding. Chen looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of representatives from dozens of worlds. I would have you survive, she said simply. Earth requests immediate ratification as a full Assembly member, with emergency authorization to deploy our defensive fleet throughout Assembly space. The chamber erupted again. The word fleet triggered particular alarm. Fleet, the Morrigan Counselor asked when order was restored. You have built more than one vessel like the Retribution. Chen nodded. 17 ships currently, with 12 more nearing completion, each with different specialized capabilities based on our understanding of harvester technology. They'd been hidden in deep space construction facilities throughout our system, away from prying eyes. The Viridian representative's appendages coiled tightly. So Earth, a primitive world that only recently achieved spaceflight, secretly constructed a battle fleet while claiming to seek peaceful relations. How convenient that these harvesters appeared just as you revealed your military capacity. I watched Chen's jaw tighten slightly, the only indication that the accusation had struck a nerve. Before she could respond, an alert sounded throughout the chamber. A communications officer rushed to High Counselor Genta, who received the message with visible shock. Outpost Epsilon 4 has gone silent, the crystalline being announced. Long-range sensors detect weapons fire, and multiple vessels matching the harvester profile. Chen exchanged glances with her team. Sooner than we projected, Kovic muttered. They're adapting to our interference, Chen replied. She turned to the council. Epsilon 4 is a research station. Minimal defenses, 300 personnel from 6-member worlds. The Retribution can reach it within 6 hours if we depart immediately. The Morrigan Councilor's crystalline form pulsed rapidly. The council has not approved. With respect, Councilor, Chen cut in. Those people will be dead or worse by the time your deliberations conclude. My ship is prepared to assist with or without official sanction. I watched the council members exchange glances, communicating in the subtle ways their varied physiologies allowed. Some showed clear alarm, others skepticism, a few what might have been relief that someone was taking action. The Retribution may proceed to Epsilon 4, High Counselor, Genta finally announced. As a humanitarian mission only, the Council will continue deliberations regarding Earth's broader proposals. Chen nodded sharply. Thank you, Counselor. She turned to her team. Dr. Patel, remain here with our technical data. Answer any questions honestly. Lieutenant Kovic with me. As they prepared to depart, I made a decision that would alter the course of my long diplomatic career. Captain, I called, hurrying after her. I request permission to accompany your mission to Epsilon 4. Chen paused, studying me with those sharp eyes. Why? The Council needs an impartial witness, I said. Someone they trust, who has seen both the harvesters and your vessel in action. What I didn't say, what I barely admitted to myself, was that after centuries of ceremonial diplomacy, I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, to witness firsthand what happened when peace failed and survival was all that mattered. Chen nodded once. Gear up. We launch in 20 minutes. As we boarded the shuttle to the Retribution, emergency alerts began flooding in from 3 more outposts. The harvesters weren't waiting for the assembly's deliberations. They had accelerated their timetable, launched their offensive early. And if Chen's predictions were correct, humanity's 17 warships stood against a force hundreds of times larger. Somehow, I knew the real test of Earth's deadly warship was only beginning. The Retribution dropped out of FTL near Epsilon 4 with a ripple of distorted spacetime that our sensors struggled to classify. What greeted us wasn't just an attack, it was a slaughter. 3 harvester vessels, larger than those we'd encountered at Sigma 9, surrounded the research station. Its outer rings had already been breached, atmosphere venting into space along with debris and bodies. Life signs, Chen demanded, leaning forward in the command chair. The bridge of the Retribution hummed with controlled urgency, human officers moving with practiced precision between stations. I stood to the side, trying to process the scale of destruction before us. Faint readings from the central hub. A sensor officer reported. Maybe 40 survivors. They've sealed themselves in the emergency shelters, but structural integrity is failing. Chen's face hardened. Tactical, status of harvester vessels. 2 actively engaged in resource extraction. 1 appears to be processing biological material. The tactical officer's voice faltered slightly on those last words. We all knew what it meant. Prepare for simultaneous engagement. Standard approach. Absorb, reflect, disable. Chen ordered. Priority on protecting the survivors. The Retribution surged forward, its metamaterial hull already reconfiguring for combat. But before we could engage, our sensors detected something new. A massive energy signature emerging from behind Epsilon 4's moon. Captain, the tactical officer shouted. New contact, bearing 035. The view screen shifted to show a vessel unlike any I'd seen before. It dwarfed the other harvester ships, its hull bristling with weapon systems. But what sent ice through my veins wasn't its size or armaments, it was its design. The ship incorporated elements that were unmistakably from various assembly species. Viridian propulsion rings, Morrigan crystalline sensor arrays, technology from a dozen worlds, cobbled together into a nightmarish whole. What in hell's name is that? Lieutenant Kovic whispered. They've been studying us, I realized aloud. Not just attacking isolated worlds. They've been stealing our technology, incorporating it into their own. Chen's grip tightened on her armrests. Tactical analysis. Energy readings exceed anything in our database, the tactical officer reported, voice strained. Its whole configuration includes elements we've cataloged from 17 different species, and it's adapting as we scan it. A cold realization washed over me. It's mimicking your metamaterial technology. I said, they've been watching Earth too. Chen stood abruptly. All hands, battle stations. This isn't a rescue mission anymore. It's a trap. The massive harvester vessel fired. Not at the station, not at the survivors, but directly at us. The beam that lanced toward the retribution wasn't just powerful. It was precisely calibrated to the frequency that had given our hull the most difficulty during the previous engagement. The retribution shuddered as the blast struck. Alarms blared across the bridge. For the first time, I saw genuine concern flash across Captain Chen's face. Hull integrity at 70%. An officer called out. They've adapted to our absorption capabilities. Evasive maneuvers, Chen ordered. Bring us around to Sector 47. Prepare emergency protocols. As the ship banked hard, narrowly avoiding another devastating blast, Chen activated the ship-wide comm system. All hands, this is the captain. Execute Protocol Lazarus. Authorization, Chen, Alpha 70. Throughout the ship, hidden compartments began to open. Crew members abandoned their standard duties and moved with swift purpose toward newly revealed equipment stations. Even the bridge was transforming around us, panels sliding away to expose systems that hadn't been there moments before. Captain, I asked, struggling to keep my balance as the ship executed another evasive maneuver. What is happening? Chen's eyes never left the tactical display. What you're seeing, Officer Tlexon, is humanity's contingency plan. The retribution isn't just a warship, it's a last resort. A communications officer turned from her station. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the harvester vessel. They're speaking in perfect Terran standard. The main view screen shifted to show something that made my heart stutter. The being that addressed us wore a face that was almost human, but wrong in subtle, horrifying ways, as if someone had studied humanity but missed the essence of what made them alive. Captain Sarah Chen, the being said, its voice a perfect mimicry of human speech patterns. We've been waiting for you. Did you think your species was the only one to recover our technology, to reverse engineer our capabilities? We've allowed your interference long enough. Chen's expression remained impassive, but I could see her pulse quickening at her throat. Who are you? She demanded. The being's almost human face split into a grotesque approximation of a smile. We are evolution perfected. We are the future you thought you could prevent, and we have come to collect what's ours. The retribution rocked violently as another blast from the monstrous harvester vessel struck our port side. Crew members braced against consoles while emergency systems fought to compensate. Through the view screen, I watched the 3 smaller harvester ships move to flank us, cutting off any escape route. Protocol Lazarus at 70%, a young officer called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. Core reconfiguration in progress. Captain Chen stood unflinching as her ship shuddered around her. She regarded the distorted, almost human face still displayed on the view screen with something approaching recognition. You've been studying us since the crash, she said, but you made a critical error in your analysis. The harvester entity tilted its head in an unsettling approximation of human curiosity. Explain your reasoning before extinction, Captain. We always seek to improve. Chen's lips curved into a grim smile. You misunderstood our greatest strength. It wasn't the technology we recovered from your scout ship. It was what we did with it. She nodded to Lieutenant Kovic, who entered a final sequence into his console. Throughout the ship, the hidden systems that had been revealed minutes earlier began to pulse with an eerie blue light. The deck plates beneath our feet vibrated with mounting energy. Humanity wasn't united when your scout crashed on Earth. Chen continued, her voice rising above the growing hum of the ship's systems. We were divided, suspicious, at the brink of our own destruction. But the threat you represented gave us something we'd never had before, a common enemy. A reason to overcome our differences. The harvester entity's manufactured face showed no emotion, but its voice carried a note of impatience. Your sociological observations are irrelevant. Your vessel is surrounded. Your absorption technology has been countered. Submit to harvesting. Protocol Lazarus at 98%, the officer announced. Chen's eyes never left the view screen. We didn't just reverse engineer your technology. We reimagined it. Instead of building weapons that destroy, we created systems that connect. The being's false face flickered with what might have been confusion. Clarify. The Retribution isn't a warship, Chen said as the humming reached its crescendo. It's a network node. Protocol Lazarus complete, the officer called out. Chen's voice rang with authority. Execute. The blue pulsing light erupted from the ship, not as a weapon beam, but as waves of energy that spread outward in all directions. The massive harvester vessel fired again, but this time the energy struck what appeared to be a shimmering barrier surrounding our ship. What is happening? I asked, bewildered as displays around the bridge showed energy signatures appearing throughout nearby space. Quantum entanglement network activated, Kovic announced, receiving connection confirmations from all Earth vessels. The view screen split to show 16 other ships, Earth's secret fleet, emerging from FTL jumps. But they didn't appear in formation around us. They materialized at strategic points throughout assembly space, near the most vulnerable outposts and worlds. You expected us to build weapons like yours, Chen told the harvester entity, whose artificial face was now showing distinct signs of alarm. Bigger, stronger, more destructive. But we built something you couldn't comprehend. A defensive network that spans the entire assembly. Every ship acts as a node, sharing energy, information, and defensive capabilities instantly across vast distances. On the tactical display, I watched in awe as the barriers surrounding the Retribution expanded, connecting with similar fields emanating from the survivors in Epsilon 4's central hub. The shields weren't just protecting our ship, they were extending to cover the endangered research station. Now, Chen said, her voice cold with determination, witness humanity's actual contribution to the assembly. The Retribution's metamaterial hull began to glow from within, channeling energy from all 17 Earth vessels simultaneously. The combined power focused through systems that hadn't existed minutes before. Not as a weapon of destruction, but as a cascading wave that washed over the harvester vessels. Where it touched, their systems failed. Weapons went offline. Propulsion died. The technological patchwork that made up their hybrid vessel began to separate, component by component, system by system. Targeted systems disruption complete, Kovic reported. Harvester vessels neutralized. The artificial face on our view screen contorted in what appeared to be genuine rage, perhaps its first authentic emotion. This changes nothing, it snarled as its image began to break apart. We are many. We will adapt. We will. The transmission cut off abruptly. The massive harvester vessel drifted, powerless but intact. The smaller ships similarly floated dead in space. No casualties on their side, Chen confirmed, glancing at me. As promised to your assembly, we disable, we don't destroy. I stared at the tactical display in disbelief. All across assembly space, Earth vessels were deploying the same defensive network, neutralizing harvester incursions without destroying a single ship. You never intended to fight a war, I realized. This was about protection, not victory. Chen nodded slowly. Humanity's learned enough about war to know there are no true victors, only survivors. A communications officer turned from her station, her expression strange. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from inside the main harvester vessel. It's not from their command systems. It appears to be coming from their holding cells. The bridge fell silent as a new voice came through our speakers, weak but unmistakably Morrigan in its crystalline resonance. "This is High Counselor Genta. I am aboard the Harvester vessel with representatives from 6 other assembly worlds. They've been collecting us, studying us, for decades. There are hundreds of us here. Please, help us." 3 weeks after the battle at Epsilon 4, I stood with Captain Chen on the observation deck of Arcturus Station. Below us, Earth's vessels maintained a protective network around the assembly's central hub, while recovery teams worked methodically through the disabled harvester ships. The process of freeing all the captives was slow, complicated by the fact that many had been held for decades, subjected to experiments and study that left both physical and psychological scars. 342 survivors recovered so far, Chen said, reviewing the latest report on her datavat, including representatives from 22 different worlds, some not even members of the assembly. I nodded, still processing the scope of the harvester's infiltration. They've been collecting key individuals for generations: scientists, diplomats, military strategists, systematically gathering intelligence on every spacefaring civilization they encountered, and using that knowledge to harvest more efficiently, Chen added. Her expression remained professional, but I'd come to recognize the subtle signs of emotion in her species, the tightness around her eyes, the controlled rhythm of her breathing. High Counselor Genta estimates she was taken 5 years ago and replaced with a duplicate, a biosynthetic copy programmed to subtly influence assembly policy. The implications were staggering. How many decisions had been influenced by these infiltrators? How many defensive measures had been quietly undermined? The Assembly's long-standing policies of demilitarization and open borders now seemed less like enlightened governance and more like carefully engineered vulnerability. "The Council's emergency session starts in an hour," I reminded her. "They'll want to hear your recommendations." Chen turned from the viewport, her eyes meeting mine directly. "Are you ready to present our findings together, Officer Tlexen? It would carry more weight coming from both of us." I found myself nodding without hesitation. The past weeks had transformed my understanding of everything I thought I knew about galactic politics, about humanity, about peace itself. Working alongside the Earth teams, I'd witnessed something remarkable, a species that prepared for war while desperately hoping to avoid it. "The Assembly needs to understand what we're facing," I agreed. "Not just the harvesters, but the infiltrators that may still be among us. Your defensive network has bought us time. But it's not a permanent solution," Chen finished. "Just the first step in a longer process, building true security while maintaining the principles that make the Assembly worth protecting." As we walked toward the Council chambers, I reflected on how differently I now viewed Earth's deadly warship. The Retribution and its sister vessels hadn't been built to conquer or destroy. They represented humanity's unique contribution to the Assembly, a protective framework born from a species that understood both the horror of conflict and the necessity of defense. The Grand Chamber was filled beyond capacity as we entered. Representatives from all member worlds had assembled, along with observers from dozens of not-member species seeking protection in the face of the harvester threat. High Counselor Genta, still recovering from her captivity, presided from a specially designed support chamber. This council recognizes Captain Sarah Chen of Earth and Senior Diplomatic Officer Tlexen, the counselor announced, her crystalline form glowing with renewed purpose. "Approach and be heard." Chen stepped forward, and I moved alongside her. Behind us, Lieutenant Kovic and Dr. Pato represented the military and scientific aspects of Earth's delegation. Together, we formed a more complete picture of humanity than any single representative could provide. "Counselors," Chen began, her voice carrying throughout the chamber without technological assistance, "Earth comes before you not to declare victory, but to propose partnership. The harvesters have been disabled, not defeated. Their technology has been contained, not destroyed. Now we must work together to build lasting security for all our worlds." As she outlined humanity's proposal for an integrated defense network, I watched the faces of the assembly representatives. Where once I had seen skepticism and fear, I now saw something new: respect. No one had been ready for Earth's deadly warship, because no one had understood what made Earth's approach to conflict truly unique. They hadn't built weapons to win wars. They had built shields to prevent them. And for the first time in my long diplomatic career, I believed peace might actually last.